Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Cafecito. I'm your host, Christiana. So excited to come to you yet again with another amazing person doing extraordinary things in our community. You guys know that those extraordinary people are people like you and others in the community that are making a difference. It doesn't have to be something that is plastered all over, social media. But when you're making an impact, it's felt. And I think it's highly important, if not urgent, for us to ensure that we are highlighting those influencers in our community, those people in our community that are making great change. So if you are one of those people, we would love to connect with you. If you don't think you're one of those people, still connect with us because I guarantee you are. Want to thank our sponsor, We the Plug. We the Plug is an online platform that works with early stage founders from ideation all the way to first seed round funding. If that's someone you know or you yourself are, we would love to hear from you. You can find us online at We the Plug. That's THA, not THE.com. Okay. You guys, I'm here yet again with a phenomenal person, a phenomenal human being that I had the pleasure of connecting with, I want to say last year during 2020. And it was during the time where lockdown was at its highest level. And it was imperative that I felt connected. And I did my due diligence to make that happen through joining as many online virtual sessions as possible and really chatting in the group chat to feel connected and not just feel like I was an observer. And in doing so, I was privileged to connect with my guest today. And I'm excited for her to share her story, all the work that she's doing in the community, and how you yourself can be a part of what it is that she's doing. Without further ado, welcome to the Cafecito podcast, Mariah.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for having me, Christiana. And you were being humble because when you and I met, you were a moderator on the panel that I was part of, and you skilled it. It was masterful moderation, and you just made us all feel so comfortable and really guided the conversation wonderfully, which of course just demonstrates why you have a show like this. It's so popular. And so thank you for having me on.
I appreciate your kind words, Mariah, but actually we connected before the moderation experience, and I was so excited. Yes, it was an event that was put on by, it was a venture, a VC summit or something, and you were speaking, and I was just blown away by who you were and all you did. And I reached out to you, and you accepted my invite, and we connected on LinkedIn. And then the opportunity came around where I had the honor of moderating a panel of amazing women like yourself, and that just took it to another level. And so it's one of those things that I always think about is, allowing things to happen organically. And that's what happened in this situation. So thank you so much. So without further ado, let's find out, what are you drinking today on the Cafecito?
I was going to get my actual Cafecito, but I was so high energy amped this morning. I said, let me not just get on here speaking a mile a minute and no more coffee for me. So I am drinking my Power Ice water in my Carta cup. Thank you, Carter, my fund administrator. Carta swag cup. So this is my Power Hydration. And I will be putting some collagen in here, my collagen lemonade in here shortly.
Oh, so you know what? I've always wondered about the collagen. I've only tried one, but I didn't stick with it. But do you find it to be really valuable to your health? Do you see an impact?
That's what they sold me on. So I actually take two. There's one that I take it's my husband's. It's a collagen protein that I bought for him. It goes in our coffee. And I have a lemonade that I put in in my water that also has biotin, and I think it has zinc and some other things that also kind of overlap with my multivitamins. But at my vintage, whether or not I feel or see a difference is like you got to do that maintenance, right? So it's a pain pill, it's a vitamin, but yeah, I think that it probably makes a difference. You know, like I've kind of tried to up my self-care since the pandemic, and you know, I've had less breakouts, and so I think it's probably helping. My nails were breaking pretty bad last year, and they seem to be growing again. So yeah, I think it's helping, but it's supposed to be good for skin, joints, cartilage, all that stuff. So I try to do everything I can to maintain, because we're all heading in the same direction.
This is very true, but I you know, I can look at you and tell that you have good genes, as well as I can tell that you're maintaining. But it's always good to hear about recommendations on alternatives to medicine. So tell the people who you are and what you do.
Sure. So Mariah Lichtenstern, founding partner of DiverseCity Ventures, which is an impact-oriented venture capital firm. We are headquartered in Sacramento, California, and our focus is on impact-oriented companies, so social, economic, and or environmental, that have inclusive teams and, most importantly, high potential for outsized returns, because we are a venture capital firm, not a philanthropy. Although I did get to start with DiverseCity Ventures doing some economic development here in California. You know, we sponsored the launch of the local chapter of the Founder Institute, which was ranked by Forbes magazine as the third most gender diverse in the world out of around 200 chapters.
Wow.
I serve as an advisor for Berkeley SkyDeck, which is out of my alma mater, UC Berkeley, and for Village Capital Finance Forward, which is out of New York City, but they're also very global in scope. And I sit on the board of Fourth Wave Female Founder Accelerator, co-founded by Nancy Perlman and Cheryl Beninga, both, you know, two phenomenal women. And I serve locally in Sacramento on a couple of startup related organizations, Board of Startup SAC, for example. So I do a lot of work with early stage founders from you know, to typically like, you know, pre-seed, seed, and then I support other companies beyond that. I recently started coaching for the NSF's Convergence Accelerator. So NSF is the National Science Foundation. And that's really exciting too, just seeing teams, some that will commercialize, some that will launch nonprofits or do other things. But the tracks that we're working with this year are involved in the blue economy, which is ocean-related technology, innovation. And then there's another track that's doing projects around misinformation and trustworthy communication. So that's been really exciting. So yeah, that's a little bit about me and what I do. Last year, I'll give this one last plug. Last year, Q1 2020, I had the privilege of becoming an Aspen Tech Policy Hub Fellow. And there, I like to say we learned policy through a fire hose. It was a bunch of technologists, you know, pretty much noobs to, you know, formal policy. There were a few that were a little more advanced. And then we chose a policy problem to, you know, try to solve for with our outputs in the last weeks of the program.
Okay.
So the problem I set out to solve was how might we close the funding gap for underrepresented founders of color, namely women, and underrepresented founders, namely women, and underrepresented people of color. So I launched the Tech Funding Equity Project out of that to help close the funding gap. So that's a little bit about what I do.
You all listening to this a little bit. She is literally, I think of her as like this superwoman that is constantly like raising the bar. You know, when you're sharing all the different aspects of the work you do, and again, as you all are listening to this is just a small percentage of what she does. I see a common thread through all of it. And that common thread is advocacy. The common thread is one of serving others, of uplifting, of creating opportunity. You know, and this is one that is a very like selfless type of approach to life and work. And it can be very taxing on not just you physically, but also mentally and spiritually. And I know that you are not just managing your own personal life, you have other human beings that you are caring for in this world as well. Talk to us a little bit about where this all started for you. Like, was this something that you've always seen yourself doing? Maybe not per se the exact type of work, but has this always been a lane that you've operated in, you know, from early start of your life till now?
Great question. So, you know, I'll start by saying this. Yes, this kind of work can be taxing, and self-care is important. And that's something that I've learned by learning more about myself. I'm an INFJ, so I am driven by impact. I can't say it's totally selfless because as an INFJ, we're, you know, introverts, we're sensitive to, you know, feeling others, you know, we're not just, I'm a left brain, right brain person. You know, we live, if you've seen like My Stroke of Genius, the TED Talk, it's a neuro, and she had a stroke in her left brain. So she was kind of in her right brain consciousness.
Yeah, I have her book.
Yeah, isn't it? It's so phenomenal. And she kind of relates the brain to a computer and the different kinds of processing. So talks about, you know, being dependent on that right brain side where all of the tangibles of the world just kind of don't exist in the same way that the left brain processes them. It's interconnectedness. So I think as an INFJ, there's a heightened sensitivity to that. And so I say all that to say, you know, I'm an empath. And, you know, I do have a superpower to be able to shut that down, because if it's, you know, sociopath, narcissist, malicious, you know, Oakland, you know, on you and like just protect, but I like guard the heart. But, you know, just like in any kind of environment, I think I have a higher sensitivity to the vibe, the mood. And so, you know, when things are not good, you know, like when I see homeless people or human suffering, I'm not happy. You know what I mean? It's like I pick up on that. So, you know, there's some of us who can just, you know, rock the latest fashion and have all the toys and kind of live off and be good. And that's not me. You know, like I want those nice things, right? I enjoy those nice things. I enjoy the life has afforded me, but I want other people to be okay too. And that's just part of that's who I am. And we're like 1% of the population that are INFJs. And so we're just a little different. And so, you know, with going to your question, I'm assuming that part of that was baked in to my DNA, and part of it kind of developed from my life experience. So I think it's a combination of nature, nurture. My mother was a registered nurse, and she had this saying that she was a rescuer, kids, cats, dogs, and pregnant women. So I definitely saw her, you know, model a certain level of you know, advocacy and altruism. And, you know, I'm sure that it influenced me. But I think where this journey began, early in life, I loved tech. I was a nerd. Like I said, I'm an introvert. So I do things. I extrovert for a cause. You know, I can get rowdy, you know, and party, you know, for a limited time, but then I go and recharge. Right. So I was the tinker in the garage trying to communicate with aliens.
Wait, really? Aliens?
Well, you know, I was a kid, so, you know, creative mind.
That's awesome.
So I'm like,
E.T.
I was like, and I grew up with E.T. and stuff like that. So I was the tinker, and I remember like hacking into my brother's conversations on the cordless phone with my radio. And so I was into technology. And you know, science fiction, I just read a lot growing up in the boondocks. And as I got older, you know, I thought I was always rewarded for being a communicator. And so I would be like a teacher or something like that, because those were examples I saw around me. You know, maybe one day I'll be a professor. I didn't know any engineers. My stepdad was a small business owner, but I really didn't see like enterprises. I didn't know what an engineer was, didn't know what a computer scientist. I didn't really have, I mean, I had access, we had Apples in our school, but I didn't really have a computer at home or anything until high school. And then even in like my first couple of years of college, I didn't. But by college, in high school, I did all of like the physics, AP physics. I did all the advanced math. I didn't have to even take math in college because I did that then. So I definitely had like a competency and a potential, but I didn't really have examples to like lead me in a technical. So when I ended up in college, I was a liberal arts major, but it was in the middle of the dot-com boom. And so the things that kind of stuck out to me were, one, Napster.
My gosh, yes, we all had Napster in college.
Burning stuff. Well, I didn't have a computer at home, so I wasn't really burning music like that. I had CDs and stuff. But my first couple of years of college, I didn't have a computer. I used a computer lab, but I would go to my friends' houses and they were burning.
Yeah.
Kind of observing and just seeing the disruption in the music industry. And I had a friend who was working at Solomon Smith Barney, at the time, that's what it was. He was studying to be a stockbroker, and he exposed me to this book, Cash Flow Quadrant. So by that time, I was an activist. I went, marching in the streets before we had hashtags, before Twitter, Facebook, and all of that. And so I definitely had that activism. I was drawn to that. I had a sense of justice. And, I'd go from the ivory tower at UC Berkeley and go home to Oakland, California, and I'd see the funeral homes filled up with kids. And I'm in this environment, and I know there's so much untapped, underserved genius, but there's lack of transportation, food deserts, there's no jobs, there's, whack education system, going from Hayward High, where I graduated and had the AP classes, to having to do a couple of months in Oakland High, where there was sewage leaking in the cafeteria, so you couldn't get lunch at school. The counselor had to camp outside his office, didn't have books for all my classes. So I knew that was the environment, that these kids were coming through. And no wonder, so much is going on when you have the Black market that you have to resort to, and all these territorial wars. And so I'm at Cal, and I started studying, ethnic studies, Pan-African studies, and started learning about the economic engineering, the history of racialized oppression. Hey, capitalism is based on exploitation. There's changes happening now with automation that, allow us to maybe disrupt some of that, historical truth, but there's always had to be an underclass to be exploited, whether it's through the prison industrial complex or slavery or whatever the case may be.
Right.
In Oakland, California, it's one of the hubs of the civil rights movement, home of the Black Panther Party. So I learned about how COINTELPRO, purposefully put drugs and guns in communities and just like deindustrialize, and all of, the redlining, all these things that were designed to keep people suppressed. So I started to see entrepreneurship as an opportunity for economic empowerment. And that really sparked that. At the same time, my now husband had come here on scholarship for film production. So to know him, I was looking at, filmmaking, and my family's very artsy. My dad was in a band and a fine artist and performer and actor, had been in some Hollywood movies. And I wasn't really interested on the performing side of things, but getting to know Sonny and working on sets, and helping to produce films. I really liked the business side. And so, when I saw what was happening with Napster and music, and I saw we were laying the fiber optics for, higher bandwidth, I saw that, and I should say this, my thesis by that time was, I was majoring in rhetoric of narrative and the image, and my thesis was on representations of people of color and hip hop as modern day minstrelsy. So I was looking at the
Wait, say that again. What was the title again?
So part of it was representations of people of color in media. And then, one of my areas of research was mainstream hip hop as modern day minstrelsy. And so by that, I mean like the Black.
Wow. Yes.
Globally throughout the 19th century. It was the preeminent form of entertainment was blackface minstrelsy.
Right.
Of course, represented Black people as buffoons, as, subhuman, as all of these things justify slavery, oppression, segregation, all of that. So I saw what was happening in the music, and I felt like that same kind of disruption is going to happen in the motion picture industry. And I thought it would afford us opportunities to have alternate streams of distribution, as I called it.
Okay.
Be able to own our cultural product. Because what I saw was that we were performing, we were allowed to be minstrels in the entertainment industry, but we weren't really having equitable ownership. We didn't have capital and distribution to produce and distribute our own content, at least not in an equitable way. So my interest in entrepreneurship really began with, capital formation around motion picture producing as a like go to market. But yes, I always knew that I wanted from that age, around college age, that I wanted to get involved in capital formation and to empower entrepreneurship in our communities to solve for that economic oppression that's a result of all of those things, from enslavement to segregation, redlining, all of that. I felt that entrepreneurship was an opportunity, and entrepreneurship was a spirit that I saw in my community, but it wasn't one that was empowered or supported. So that was really my in, and I think that's endured throughout in remaining an impact-oriented investor.
As you're talking, like literally, I feel like, I'm sure you all can agree with me that are listening as well. I feel like you just took us on a quick timeline journey history lesson. You went through so many different eras of life where we have seen constant misappropriation of not just Black culture, but other indigenous groups, of not just weaponizing, of finding opportunities to weaponize the community, but also finding opportunities to tear it down, to destroy it. But yet there was always something kind of feeding back into it to keep it thriving. And there's a variety of I think, ways that we can speak to how that has happened, whether it's through spirituality, through knowledge passing down through generations, through understanding who we are as a people and implementing that into our way of life on a daily basis, and then our professional career and passing it down. But it seems like you have taken on this kind of very structured approach that has spanned not just from the cultural part of it, but also like feeding it into the economical component of it, and then combining it to present this kind of cohesive knowledge that you could then like distribute within the community, connected to not just the work that you're doing under other companies, but also through your own company. So talk a little bit about like, how were you able to bring the culture part of it, the economic part of it, building out this kind of structured knowledge that then you've been able to disseminate in a way that people can come in that have that entrepreneurial mindset, or maybe don't even realize they have it, but still able to come in, understand what it is that you are doing with the community that you're working with, and then say, okay, yeah, I see where I can fit in. This is where I can apply this, and then move forward with kind of growing or building.
Yeah, it's like, especially in our industry, I think there's a lot of status quo, right? There's status quo, and there's kind of like this thing. I'll just use diversity for an example, DEI, where the focus is has been historically on women pre-George Floyd, right? Like, gotta do diversity, so we're going to start with women. That's going to be our go-to-market because 50% of the population are women. Everybody knows a woman. We'll start there. And the assumption is like we can't walk and chew gum, but when we go over the things that we just discussed, with the historical, systemic, oppression of people, whether it's dispossession of land or whatever the case may be, this is multifaceted. It's highly engineered. I mean, we are a sophisticated society with multiple intricate parts and so many different personalities that do different things, right? Like, we're also so different, have different gifts, skills, et cetera. And so the solutions to these systemic problems are going to be no less complex, right? There's no silver bullet. Every, person has to play their role, and some are going to stay in a certain lane. Some are going to be, multifaceted in that. Right. And, I kind of think of it, I use the analogy of parenting a lot, my godmother had 9 children. That is not my anointing.
That is not your ministry.
I am one and done, right? But I think of, the entrepreneurial endeavors. I think of those as brainchildren. I call them brainchildren. And so, in the same way that if you're going to, launch a company, you have to put together a team, you put together systems. And the same thing happens with like parenting, right? Like you have your support system, you have, ideally you have organization within how you do things. Make sure your kid stays alive, right? And
That's the goal.
Going back to kind of the INFJ part, the J is kind of the part that holds it all together and that like is drawn to systems. And I'm not so much like a master of systems as like the INTJ. I am, I do rely a lot on systems, but I think that that F part just makes me a little more maybe empathetic and
okay.
And maybe my INTJ counterpart, but like I work really well with INTJs, which are also pretty rare in terms of like systemizing things. And so there's the one part where you have to transfer the knowledge. If you don't know, you can't do better. And I think in tech particularly, the focus is so much on the left brain, the tactical, you see people who come out of science backgrounds or tech backgrounds, and they don't necessarily have the cultural competency or historical context to even understand DEI, right? So there's knowledge share that has to happen, right? And then if you can apply system solutions to start addressing, it's not all systems. We're human beings, and we are systems in a sense, but we're human beings. There's a part that is not just like technical per se, right?
Right.
Spiritual, soulful element. And so, to act like those two aren't always together, we're being negligent and short-sighted. So I just feel like there was that, part of me that had to be exposed to the historical context and to really care and to bring that lens into an industry that really wasn't focused on that, that was, in a lot of ways part of the problem or kicking the can or just not wanting to develop that confidence. Out these mythologies around why DEI was an issue. And a lot of times, I mean, these are things that are just proved like, oh, it's a pipeline issue. There's not enough, college graduates.
Well, yeah, sure. Right.
We've not done the work, but now we've done the work in response to your mythology, and your mythology is just that. It's disproven. So now what? And then it's like, we didn't really think about that. We thought you were just going to believe it. So there's that part of the narrative, but then there's the execution. And that's where trying to systematize things come into play. I was, like I said, with producing, I was drawn to the entrepreneurial side of, helping to create that structure to support the creatives. Filmmakers are creatives, but they need the business side to eat, right? And so, the entrepreneurial part was always just attracted to me. I've always been drawn to that. And so I feel like kind of privileged, to draw from, both sides of my brain, both, the soft and hard skills.
Yeah.
And, like be involved in systems. And so there's a principle called like the law of perseverance. And the of it is that, the vision remains the same, right? And so I have this vision for, how I want to apply, the gifts, talents, and calling on my life to my purpose, my legacy, or whatever I'm on this earth to do, right?
Yeah.
And to reduce suffering so that I can be happier, like I'm, in the environments that I'm in, right? Like, good to me when I'm able to, have positive impact, right? Like not to the point of exploitation, of course, but like, do good. And so, there's that element of, putting the systems in place that I think just harmonizes. And so the entrepreneurial part facilitates that. And, I've been fortunate to have mentors. I've been fortunate to be able to go to great schools, to have education. And I think it's just incumbent on me to like pay that forward and to lower the barriers to entry, because there are so many systemic barriers. So for me, I don't know, that's just part of my calling and responsibility.
Yeah, I really appreciate how you talked about how you marry it all together in presenting opportunities for those that look and sound like you, come from where you come from. to ensure that, I remember growing up, there was always a saying, each one teach one, each one reach one. And the whole thought process behind that was that once you kind of figure it out, however much you figured out, you always make sure that you're bringing someone or many with you, always reaching back, because there's always going to be challenges for each and every one of us, no matter what it is that we're dealing with, we're building. And so to help level the playing field just a little bit, to say, you know what, I figured this out. You don't have to go that way. You can go this direction. That is put there to distract you. Don't pay attention to that. Pay attention to this kind of deal. Like, it's something that is so needed. And part of why We the Plug was even born, and where I find myself always being drawn to, but also I think serving out of that spirit of, why would I want others to suffer unnecessarily? And if we're supposed to all be working for this greater goal, of wanting to rise above, to show up and be our best selves, then why wouldn't you be a part of helping to create that in whatever way you can? Because I think oftentimes we will say, oh, well, I don't have the money, or I don't have the big network group. And so what can I do? And it's like, we all have something we can offer. There's always something of value. And so as you were sharing that, I really was drawing a lot from that. So let's kind of pivot a little bit to.
Can I say one thing though, that you remind me of a saying of Paul C. Brunson. He has a saying, one hand reaching forward, one hand reaching back. And so often, like, again, we're within a culture and a system, a hegemony that kind of allows like the trickle through, like they did it, so you can do it. And I remember just like hearing certain people, like Tristan Walker, for example, has talked about, being taught that he had to be at a certain level before giving back. Now he did, give back. He started, I think it was it Code 2040 with
yes.
Powers. And I'm so glad he did that. But, there was like this expectation put upon him that, get your thing straight before you try to go help anybody else.
Yeah.
It's a false narrative, but I think that's the culture, the culture, the American way. It's like, it's somewhat individualistic, right? And there are small, communities that, in divide and conquer that occurs, like, well, I'm just going to do for this group, my family, my geography, my industry, or, my network or whatever, but it's kind of, elitist, right? And
yes,
this concept of, competition, the 0 to 1 mentality of, monopoly. And, there's been all of these expectations that have been pushed on us. And, like you contrast that with like, some like the African principles, right? I'm trying to think of
the one, if you want to go far, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, something like that, go with others, something like that.
That's an example, right? Like, but one thing that like my husband teaches about Ubuntu, which is like a South African concept of like, we are like one, like I am because you are, kind of thing. And so, some people in these days, they call it co-opetition, but you can't, if you have a company that's, that's putting plastic in the ocean and they may be generating revenues in the short term, but at what cost?
Right.
And then like, at what cost even to that company in the long term, or just doing short-term things that seem lucrative at the time, but have long-term implications. And I mean, the fall of every Western empire has been because of that short-sightedness of I'm going to get what looks good for me now without considering the long-term implications. So it's an that I mean, where you look at the collective impact, and it's kind of like this. I forget the name of the economist who wrote the New York Times article that was so influential for all these decades, that the purpose of a corporation is to benefit the shareholders. And now there's been like think his name was Milton. I can't remember, but
I know what you're talking about.
Now the pushback is like, no, the corporation's purpose is to the benefit of stakeholders, which include the shareholders. It doesn't mean that you still have your fiduciary duties, right? But not at the expense of, say, the environment or like the existence of mankind. Obviously,
right.
So anyway, yeah, I think there's there's that element of the culture that's kind of pushed us to not think collectively and to be individualistic and competitive. And I think we're moving more towards an era where like you don't have to dominate the market, have your share and still do very well for yourself, for your stakeholders, for your investors, and not just be like so cutthroat. And, I don't know. It's something that they've sold us on for sure, a culture of just
absolutely
consumption and competition. And I hope that shifts in many ways, because it really, you'll never be number one at everything. And I think it breeds contempt and bitterness and envy and like just all these unhealthy, toxic emotions.
You are speaking facts right now. And as you're talking, I want to kind of move into how you've kind of set DiverseCity up in a way that is kind of changing the landscape for the work that you're doing. So can you talk a little bit about specifically how DiverseCity is doing that? Like, how are you all coming in and kind of shaking up in this industry?
Well, starting where we are. So like I mentioned, like we started, with a nonprofit doing economic development. So I organized the firm and started building up the brand and the deal flow through my advisory roles and adding value to startups and taking my experience as an entrepreneur operator, someone who's a web developer and app developer and had done all these technical things, which people just don't see. Maybe in my hoodie, maybe they'll see it, but they look at me, especially I'm wearing my platforms, whatever, and they're like, they don't see a tech person. But, just taking that experience of having been an operator, been an entrepreneur, maybe not at some big tech company, but sort of where like most entrepreneurs start, I definitely have that experience. And, just like helping people not make the same mistakes or to accelerate their path, leverage the privilege network that I'm to, try to be a bridge. You mentioned people coming from like communities like mine. Like my communities are very diverse. I mean, my mom was white. I was born in Oakland, California. She raised my brother and I in a really rural area, and there were wonderful aspects of that, some not so wonderful aspects of that. But essentially, all through my childhood, my entire family that I was exposed to was white. And like my brother, he spent a little bit longer in Oakland than I did. So, he was kind of like my window to that part of the world, and would watch like different strokes and I'm thinking of a handful of shows growing up in the 80s that had Black characters, 221 and 227, I think it was. And I could name off, a few of them, but Cosby Show, whatever. That was somewhat of a lens, and MTV raps and, was somewhat of a lens. My brother would like expose me to, the emerging hip hop and everything. But, for the most part, I grew up in like a white culture until I was in junior high, and I saw like a lot of, just different dynamics between, the two. And of course, there's a Hispanic community, which sometimes is more accepting of me. I had like a light skin, even though I'm on the other side of the paper. Light girl, long hair. You know what I mean? There's those elements, right? So I've been exposed to so much, not only in terms of like ethnicity, but also class. I know how to abound, I know how to abase. My mother was a registered nurse. We owned property. We had, rental properties. We had cars and all of this. And then she became disabled, and we were on welfare until she could get disability, which is like nothing. And you can't have more than $2,000 in the bank. You can only own one car. You can only own. So basically, you can't have any kind of inheritance for your children if you're on disability.
Wow.
Craziest thing. That's a whole nother, kind of like policy discussion. But I say all that to say is I've been exposed to different classes within the white community, within the Black community, Hispanic community, Asian community, being afforded the privilege of being at Cal, which is 40% Asian. And so, again, I've seen a lot of like culture conflict. So with DiverseCity Ventures, we have the saying, diversity includes you. And so I feel like being a bridge to cultural understanding as part of my calling. You know, my mom's first husband was Japanese. His mother was interned in Tule Lake during World War II. You know, her second husband, a Black man whose family were refugees from the terrorist South, you know, who settled in Oakland. He was a Navy veteran, and you know, his family worked in the port, and he went on and, you know, started a small business, became a fine artist. But, you know, there's like a diversity within my family and environment. And so I try to bring that lens to the work that I do, and having minored in ethnic and Pan-African studies. You know, I say like the ethnic studies was so enlightening and healing for me in a lot of ways, because I remember reading I remember taking an English class on African-American writers. And it was my first time really reading in detail about the horrors of slavery. I mean, we just don't get it in high school. Most people are never exposed. And I was just so depressed. Like, it's like reading about the Holocaust. If anyone's done a deep dive on that, it's the horrors of what human beings can do to each other. And I read about the Armenian Holocaust. I had a professor whose mother survived the Armenian genocide. Yeah. You know, I was just so depressed. But when I started studying ethnic studies, for example, just here in the US, learning about how the slave codes came to be to divide and conquer poor whites and enslaved Black people. I mean, before there was no difference, before the slave codes were implemented. And so they actually came together and burnt down Jamestown, the white elite. They came up against the white elite. So I keep remembering that, you know, the majority of all Americans really come from a kind of oppressed background, and that there has been divide and conquer to prevent us from working together. That was very healing, because it gave me a little more empathy for people who like, I don't have if I can empathize and understand, I'm more empowered to solve the problem, to address that fear, to address the underlying psychology, understand the roots of it. So with Diversity Ventures, you know, we bring that lens even in the DEI work we do, like with the Tech Funding Equity Project and the Opportunity Pledge for GPs and LPs to understand how DEI and governance impact the systemic nature of our industry in terms of representation of general partners coming into the industry. If you're expecting folks who aren't hired equitably to spin out, you know, and have this kind of GP commit and this kind of attributable track record, we'll expect to move if we're not being hired in the first place. And so kick the can another 20 years because you want to be comfortable with, you know what I'm saying? But we're out here doing the, and we're getting exploited to a certain extent of doing the work, but not getting the equitable recognition and compensation because we don't come from these traditional backgrounds, right? So, you know, that's one part of it. Or we have the Startup DEI Pledge, which deals with you know, the culture that you're forming when you're a 0 to 15 employment, right? And studies show that once you get to 15 employees, now you're kind of having to fix the culture. You're having to deal with the revolving door. Whereas if you're building with DEI in mind, then you're going to help your culture. And we know that diverse boards, diverse operating teams, diverse founders, they perform well, they outperform. And so there is an economic benefit to it, right? So it's not just, you know, diversity for diversity's sake, not to say there's anything wrong with that, but it's also a bottom line. So we do that work. We bring that work in that lens to Diversity Ventures. And, you know, I try to, you know, show that, hey, this is a pathway, you know, because a lot of it, like I said, I never knew what an engineer was. I didn't know what computer science was, right? I try to do thought leadership so that people can see that this is a path. And I try to, again, you know, bring down the barriers to it and just like our thesis of how we're even growing. So I know that, you know, my work has helped inspire other folks. Like if she's going to dare to do it, then I surely can. Because so there's that part. And then, you know, like when I work with founders, especially in the advisory roles with accelerators, we're moving faster, right? And I like to work at that stage, but then I'm also building out our model so that we can scale that, especially that bottleneck at the friends and family round, you know, and you know, I do advocacy around the accredited investor definition so we can get more folks that are able to, you know, build wealth by investing in private companies that aren't on crowdfunding platforms, which in fact, most private companies are not on crowdfunding platforms and may never be able to be on crowdfunding platforms. But that doesn't mean that at the earliest stages that, a dentist who makes who makes, $190,000 a year and has $750,000 of net worth shouldn't be able to invest in a privately company that's doing a Reg D 506C offering, you know what I mean? Which they're excluded from now. So, if we can solve for things like that, which I think is a 14th Amendment financial freedom issue, then maybe we can, open up that bottleneck to where more people are making it to a place where they're venture backable and can grow these like huge companies and employ people and have diverse cultures and are creating wealth even by having high paid employees that go back and invest in their communities. So I think it's multifaceted. And maybe some people are put off by that level of complexity or don't want to do the work. I'm not the one. INFJs can deal with complexity. I'll just say this one last thing that goes to, our saying of diversity includes you. Right now, post George Floyd, there's been this kind of like performative thing that's like focused on Black entrepreneurs. And I think it's great. It needs to be done. It's the season. It's the time. We've been at this work. This ain't new for us. But when I say diversity includes you, yes, we absolutely want to invest in Black founders. We want to invest in brown founders. We want to invest in female founders. But, guess what? There's also founders out there that are white and Asian, and they have access to capital. They have the resources to get their companies off the ground much easier than their Black and brown counterparts. And you know what? I want to make sure that if they're coming to us and we see an opportunity for outsized returns there and they want to build diverse, equitable, and inclusive teams, they want to hire Black and brown and female operators, but they might not have the network because of de facto segregation, we can help with that. Because that in tandem with funding more Black and brown and female founders is helping solve the problem by bringing in underrepresented operators who may not ever be founders, but can certainly invest in their communities as well. So, that's kind of how we're looking at the work. And again, there is no silver bullet, but we can come at it in a lot of different ways. And why not?
What you're doing is so important in this community. Because there's so much opportunity to, I think, invest in the founder in the early stage of helping them navigate through the process of building their company, but also understanding the fundamentals of doing so. But then that other part of understanding how to raise, how to sustain yourself in that whole process. And what you all are doing, I think, is supporting those initiatives. But I think also it's coming from, which you've said time and time again throughout this podcast, is you're coming from this equitable standpoint, because oftentimes you don't really see that. It's very uneven with who ends up coming out the winner in all of this. And so I really am excited about all that you all are doing and bringing it to the community. For those who are listening, what would be the call to action? Whether they are entrepreneurs or they they're a serial entrepreneur, have started several businesses, have raised, but they're listening to this for a variety of reasons. Maybe it's they're wanting to increase their network. Maybe it's they're missing something and they're not sure what, and so they're drawn to this topic. But what would be your call to action for those that are listening today?
Well, I would say, the easiest thing is, if you're interested in these topics, you want to know more, you want to know what I'm up to. LinkedIn is probably the best way to keep in touch. I'm just linkedin.com/in/Mariah Lichtenstern. And I try to share things that I'm reading. I try to put out thought leadership. I write, articles and posts periodically. You can just follow there. You can follow, and I like to follow people as well. If you're an entrepreneur, maybe you're just early on the journey, we connect, and let me know what you're doing. We track folks. We like to see the progress, and even if you're too early for institutional capital, I do like to see people's journey and get to know them. To the extent that I have 24 hours in a day, just like everyone else, and we're only human, right? So oftentimes there's this heavy expectation because you just feel like I need, and you forget that other people need to, you know, rest. We need to recreate. We need to stop thinking about business all the time. We need to have time with our families. So I would just say, like, you know, be pleasantly persistent, understand that things fall below the fold. You know, VCs are typically
persistent. I love that.
I emailed you 5 weeks ago and you didn't ever get back to me. Yeah, because my dad died. Okay. No, right. Like, you don't know what's going on in people's lives.
Exactly. Be compassionate.
About like there's something wrong with them or so-and-so is like this, and they make up these narratives instead of just like being persistent and continuing to do the work and then come back to the well, and you'll be more well received if you're coming back and touching base and, you know, giving updates than if you're like being negative and toxic, because then don't nobody want to deal with you. You know, so pleasantly persistent, let us know what's going on, send updates, be consistent with your updates. For others who are interested in maybe like, maybe you're an operator that's, you know, done quite well and you're an accredited investor making more than $200,000 a year or $300,000 as a household, or have more than $1 million in net worth, or a handful of other qualifiers. And you want to, you know, invest in startups, but you maybe don't have the time or the capacity to be part of an angel group or do the due diligence. You know, you can in emerging managers like myself. And this is what we do. This is what we do all day. This is our expertise. So, you know, if that's something that you're interested in, then reach out in that regard and say, hey, I want to invest in startups, and, you know, how do I get started? That's definitely something that folks can do. So I would just start with that. And if you just want to learn more about DiverseCity Ventures, it's at DiverseCityV.com. So yeah, I guess that's those are ways for people to take action.
I really was drawn to something you were saying, especially when you were saying about the founders and how it's important to be mindful of this process that you're going through, and that it's going to be ongoing investing in self, but don't have these unrealistic expectations. Just keep doing the work. And I think one of the things that has kind of thrown most of us off is this whole kind of microwave type of society, where it's like everything presented to us seemed to be overnight. And it's like, but it's not. This person may be popping at 18 or even 15 or maybe even 10 years old, they're popping. But when you talk to the guardians, the parents, they had started at 18 months old. You know what I mean? Like, it's that kind of thing where it's like, we're fed this one narrative of anyone can do it, it's fast turnover. And maybe that is true for some, but I always tell people, but is that sustainable? And are you looking for sustainability, or are you looking for just the quick overnight thing? And
quick overnight.
I just really appreciate that so much with you sharing that.
Quick overnight is the anomaly. You know, and it's a narrative that may inspire us, and that's fine. Get your inspiration where you can get it. But like you said, you know, it's much easier if you come from a generational wealth, whether it's coming from, you know, parents putting you in school or passing down property or whatever. We don't start on a level playing field. But when you are starting, you know, scrappily, you know, some people just have a gift. Some people have opportunities, and that's where we do need to try to pay it forward, right? But for most of us, it's going to be about persistence, going back to that law of persistence, where the vision remains the same, but the strategy to get there may change. And there's so many examples of that. So, you know, and we also say in venture capital, like, be married to the problem, not to the solution, right? Because the solution may change. You can look at so many examples. Instagram is a perfect example. Started out as bourbon, and, you know, they pivoted over to what people really wanted. So just recognize that it's the same with us. Like, when I got, you know, I decided I really wanted to go hard on venture capital. It was like 2015, and they were not ready. Like, you talk too much about diversity. Didn't nobody want to hear that. And so, am I going to give up, or am I going to find another way? Am I going to go over, through, around time? And it's persistence. It's persistence. And, you know, we have the same kind of barriers to LPs. So sometimes you get so caught up in the white man. Yeah, all that exists. And maybe it's going to be harder for you than the next person, but persist. And that's why we win.
Yes.
We persist.
Yes.
We could have been done, given up, and been broken and just stayed down. We could have done that. If you're the one who gets back up, And you might be the one that breaks it open for the generations coming behind you. So don't get so caught up in the narrative. It's true. There are all of these inequalities and disparities, and we have to work on those as well. But don't let that be the story that you tell yourself about, why you won't succeed. Confidence is contagious. So
yes.
Tell the story of how you're winning, how you're persisting, how you're making progress despite all the odds. And over time, you will continue to attract that kind of energy and those people to you, and people will say, oh, this person is in it to win it, and I want to be part of that. So, it's not, for some people, there'll be those, open doors and unusual opportunities. But for the rest of us, for the long tail, you got to be persistent and do the work.
Mic drop, y'all. Mic drop. I hope you all have been taking notes. I hope you all have been recording. I hope you all play this and then share it with others. Mariah, tell the people where they can find you.
So I'm on LinkedIn. I'm at Lighted Star on Twitter and Instagram. I'm Mariah at DiverseCityV.com. DiverseCityV.com is the website. Oh, and check out techfundingequity.com and learn about startup redlining. And if you want to change the system and be part of dismantling systemic inequality, especially when it comes to startup fundraising, that's a great place to start.
You all heard it here. Thank you so much, Mariah, for taking out time. Like I said in the beginning, we know that you have a lot on your plate, and we are so thankful and grateful that you stopped by to share knowledge with us and our community.
I don't have a full plate and an empty one. So thank you for having me.
Thank you all again for tuning in to another episode of the Cafecito. You guys check us out on YouTube. You can click We the Plug, subscribe. You can watch all the Cafecito shows there. You can also watch clips as well on our membership page if you're a part of that, as well as our website, WeThePlugTHA.com as well. Again, thank you all so much for spending time with us today. Take time to enjoy your day and each other, and we look forward to seeing you again. Bye-bye.